Before his name became legend, before Cairo trembled under falling gold, before European cartographers painted a black king clutching a nugget larger than imagination, there was a quiet empire in West Africa that most of the world barely understood. This is where the story must begin. Not with wealth, but with power. Not with gold, but with land. Not with Mansa Musa, but with Mali itself. A world that did not know Africa. In the early 14th century, the world was divided by ignorance as much as by distance. Europe was clawing its way out of famine, plague, and feudal conflict. The Middle East was a crossroads of trade, scholarship, and faith. Asia thrived under complex empires and ancient systems of commerce. And Africa? To much of the outside world, Africa was either invisible or reduced to rumor. Many believed it was a land of beasts and mystery, not kingdoms and scholars. Few outside its borders understood that West Africa already held one of the most organized, wealthy, and powerful empires on earth. That empire was Mali. At its height, Mali stretched across what is now Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Niger, Mauritania, and parts of Burkina Faso. It controlled key trade routes across the Sahara, linking sub-Saharan Africa to North Africa and the Mediterranean world. Gold flowed north. Salt flowed south. Knowledge moved both ways. And at the center of it all stood a ruler whose wealth would become so vast that history itself struggled to measure it. Mali did not appear overnight. Its roots trace back to the 13th century, to a man named Sundiata Keita, the empire's founder. Sundiata was not only a warrior, but a statesman. He united fractious Mandinka clans, defeated rival kingdoms, and laid the political foundations of Mali. Under his rule, Mali became stable, centralized, and economically formidable. Crucially, Sundiata understood the value of trade. Gold was abundant in West Africa, especially in regions like Bambuk, Bure, and later Galam. But gold alone meant little without control. Mali controlled the mines indirectly, regulated production, and dominated the trade routes that carried gold north across the Sahara to cities like Tunis, Fez, and Cairo. Salt, essential for survival, came from the desert mines of Tagaza. Whoever controlled salt controlled life. Mali controlled access to both. This balance of gold and salt created unimaginable wealth long before Europe began its colonial expansions. The Keita dynasty and sacred authority. Mali's rulers came from the Keita dynasty, believed to descend from Bilal ibn Rabah, the Ethiopian companion of the Prophet Muhammad, according to later Islamic tradition. Whether literal or symbolic, this claim reinforced legitimacy, spirituality, and prestige. Kings were not merely political leaders. They were sacred figures. The title Mansa meant more than king. It meant emperor, supreme ruler, custodian of land, people, and prosperity. The Mansa owned all land in theory, delegated authority to governors, and ruled through a sophisticated administrative system. Provincial governors, judges, military commanders, and tax collectors ensured order across vast distances. Loyalty was enforced through oaths, family ties, and military power. By the time Mansa Musa entered this world, Mali was already rich. What Musa would do was something else entirely. Who was Mansa Musa before the gold? Mansa Musa was born Musa Keita around 1280 CE. His early life remains partly veiled, but what we do know is telling. He was not born into chaos. He was born into structure. Musa was related to the royal family, possibly a grandnephew of Sundiata Keita. He was educated, literate, and deeply religious. Unlike many rulers of his era, he was not known first as a conqueror, but as an administrator. Islam had already spread into Mali through trade centuries earlier. Muslim merchants from North Africa brought not only goods, but ideas, law, and scholarship. Mali's rulers practiced a blend of traditional African beliefs and Islam. Musa, however, was fully committed to Islam. This faith would shape his destiny and change the world. Musa did not inherit the throne in the usual way. According to historical accounts, particularly those recorded by Arab scholars like Al-Amari, the previous Mansa, Abu Bakr II, became obsessed with the Atlantic Ocean. fascinated by what lay beyond the horizon. Abu Bakr allegedly believed the ocean had no end. He launched expeditions westward. The first fleet never returned. Undeterred, Abu Bakr abdicated the throne, placed Musa as his deputy, and set off again with a massive fleet of ships, men, and supplies. He was never seen again. Whether this account is literal, exaggerated, or symbolic, the outcome was clear. Mansa Musa ascended the throne around 1312 CE, without conquest, without rebellion, without bloodshed. When Musa became Mansa, he inherited something unprecedented. Mali controlled over half of the known world's gold supply at the time. Gold from Mali fueled economies across North Africa and Europe. Coins minted in Venice, Genoa, and Cairo often originated from West African gold. Yet Mali itself did not use gold as currency internally. Gold dust was reserved for the Mansa alone. The people used cowrie shells, silver, or barter. This policy kept gold rare and valuable in foreign markets, while strengthening royal authority. Musa now controlled the system. And unlike his predecessors, he would not keep it hidden. In his early years as ruler, Musa focused on stability. He strengthened administration, ensured tax collection, and maintained military readiness. Mali's army, composed of cavalry and infantry, protected trade routes and borders. Musa expanded Mali's influence over cities like Timbuktu and Gao, though some were already within Mali's sphere before his reign. What changed was emphasis. He invested heavily in Islam. Mosques were built. Scholars were welcomed. Islamic law gained prominence in courts, especially in urban centers. Mali began to be seen not just as rich, but as civilized in the eyes of the Muslim world. This was strategic. Islam connected Mali to a global network that stretched from Spain to Persia. It opened doors to diplomacy, trade, and knowledge. And Musa was about to walk straight through those doors. Every Muslim who is able is required to perform the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, once in their lifetime. For a man with Musa's faith and power, the pilgrimage was not optional. It was inevitable. But Musa did not intend to travel quietly. He prepared for years. He would not simply visit Mecca. He would announce Mali to the world. And the world would never forget his name. When Mansa Musa finally set his plans into motion, the world had no warning for what was coming. No empire had ever attempted a journey on this scale. No ruler had ever turned a religious obligation into a global announcement of power. And no one, from West Africa to the Mediterranean, was prepared for the economic aftershocks that would follow. This was not travel. This was a spectacle. The Hajj was not new. Pilgrims from across the Muslim world traveled to Mecca every year. Merchants, scholars, nobles, and commoners walked road or sailed in modest caravans, often facing danger, hunger, and death along the way. Mansa Musa rewrote the idea of pilgrimage entirely. Years before departure, preparations began across Mali. Gold was gathered from royal treasuries. Textiles were woven. Supplies were stockpiled. Livestock was raised. Administrators were instructed. Escorts were chosen. This was not excess without order. It was a carefully planned statecraft. According to historical accounts, Musa set out with a caravan of around 60,000 people. Among them were soldiers, courtiers, administrators, servants, slaves, scholars, merchants, and religious officials. Each group had a role. 12,000 of the entourage were enslaved men and women, each reportedly dressed in fine silk and carrying gold staffs. Hundreds of camels carried gold, with estimates ranging from 80 to 100 camels, each bearing up to 300 pounds of gold dust. The numbers vary between sources, but even the lowest estimates are staggering. No ruler had ever moved wealth like this across continents. Nothing about the caravan was accidental. Mansa Musa wore robes of silk and brocade, materials imported from distant lands. His appearance alone sent a message. Mali was not isolated. Mali was connected. Mali was refined. Gold was not hidden in chests. It was displayed openly. This was intentional. In West African tradition, power was visible. A king's wealth was not meant to be concealed. It was meant to reassure allies, intimidate rivals, and affirm divine favor. Musa understood that perception was power. Every city he passed through would remember Mali. The journey from Mali to Mecca was brutal, even for seasoned travelers. The Sahara Desert was unforgiving. Heat, sandstorms, bandits, and dehydration claimed countless lives each year. But Musa's caravan moved like a floating city. Wells were prepared along known routes. Food supplies were abundant. Soldiers ensured security. Guides familiar with desert navigation led the way. The caravan crossed through Walata, a key Saharan trade city, then moved north toward the Maghreb. Every stop became an event. People gathered to witness the procession. Markets erupted. Gold entered circulation. And with gold came change. In each town and settlement, Mansa Musa distributed gold freely. He gave alms to the poor. He rewarded scholars. He paid merchants generously. He donated to mosques. He settled debts. He compensated local rulers and officials. His generosity followed Islamic principles of charity, but its scale was unmatched. Gold flowed into local economies faster than they could absorb it. Prices rose. Inflation crept in quietly at first, then aggressively. Gold, once scarce and precious, became suddenly abundant. This was the first sign of the chaos to come. If the desert crossings announced Musa's wealth, Cairo confirmed it. Cairo, in the 14th century, was one of the greatest cities on earth. It was a hub of scholarship, commerce, and political power under the Mamluk Sultanate. Merchants from across the Mediterranean, Africa, and Asia traded there. When news spread that the ruler of Mali had arrived, the city erupted with curiosity. No one expected what they saw. Musa entered Cairo surrounded by thousands, dressed in splendor, distributing gold without hesitation. He met with scholars, judges, merchants, and officials. He gave lavish gifts to the poor and powerful alike. Protocol mattered deeply in Cairo. Foreign rulers were expected to show deference to the Sultan. Bowing, kneeling, or kissing the ground was customary. Musa refused. Politely, firmly, and without insult, he explained that he bowed only to God. This moment was delicate. It could have turned hostile. Instead, it became legendary. Al-Nasir Muhammad recognized Musa's confidence not as arrogance, but as sovereignty. Musa was not a subordinate king. He was an equal. When Musa finally greeted the Sultan, he did so with dignity, offering gifts so extravagant that even Cairo's elite were stunned. Gold poured into the court, and Cairo's economy began to unravel. Musa's generosity had consequences no one foresaw. By flooding Cairo with gold, he unintentionally devalued the metal. Prices soared. Gold lost purchasing power. Inflation spread across Egypt and neighboring regions. This was not temporary. Historical records suggest that the effects lasted over a decade. Gold markets from Cairo to Mecca were destabilized. Merchants struggled to price goods. Wages fluctuated. Trade patterns shifted. Never before had a single individual altered regional economies simply by existing. Centuries later, economists would still study this moment. Mansa Musa did not just spend money. He bent markets. As Musa continued his journey eastward toward Mecca, word of the economic disruption followed him. He began to understand the magnitude of his actions. This realization did not harden him. It humbled him. On his return journey, Musa attempted to reverse some of the damage. In Cairo, he borrowed large amounts of gold back from merchants at high interest rates in an effort to reduce gold circulation. It was one of the earliest recorded attempts at monetary correction. The damage could not be fully undone, but the effort revealed something important. Mansa Musa was not reckless. He was learning in real time how powerful he truly was. When Musa reached Mecca, he fulfilled the spiritual heart of his journey. He performed the rites of the Hajj with devotion. He prayed. He fasted. He gave thanks. He distributed charity. Unlike in Cairo, Mecca was accustomed to pilgrims of wealth and rank. But even there, Musa stood apart. He funded religious institutions. He supported scholars. He paid for infrastructure to assist future pilgrims from Africa. He did not merely pass through Mecca. He left an imprint. The journey home was slower, heavier, and more reflective. Musa was no longer simply a king traveling to worship. He was now a figure known across the Islamic world. His name circulated in markets, courts, and schools. Stories of his wealth spread faster than his caravan. Cartographers in Europe would soon hear of him. Chroniclers would write his name with awe and confusion. Africa, once dismissed, now demanded attention. When Mansa Musa turned back toward Mali, he was no longer simply the ruler of a wealthy empire. He was famous. His name had traveled ahead of him, carried by merchants, scholars, and diplomats. In Cairo, in Mecca, in Medina, and across North Africa, people spoke of the Black King from the far west whose gold had bent markets and humbled courts. But Musa did not return home intoxicated by attention. He returned with purpose. What he did next would determine whether his wealth was a moment in history or a foundation for civilization. The journey back to Mali took months. It was slower than the outward pilgrimage, not only because of logistics, but because Musa stopped often. He spoke with scholars. He negotiated with merchants. He observed cities and institutions. The Hajj had exposed him to something beyond gold. He had seen how knowledge, law, architecture, and learning created lasting power. And he understood something most rulers never grasp. Wealth fades. Institutions endure. When he finally crossed back into Mali, he carried not just treasure, but ideas. Before Mansa Musa, Timbuktu was already important, but it was not yet legendary. Founded around the 12th century near the Niger River, Timbuktu began as a seasonal camp for Tuareg traders. Over time, its location turned it into a key trading post linking desert caravans with river commerce. Salt from the Sahara arrived. Gold from the south departed. Books, textiles, and ideas passed through quietly. It was prosperous, but it was not yet a center of learning on a global scale. That would change. Mansa Musa understood that power in the Islamic world rested on more than armies and gold. It rested on knowledge. Courts were judged by their scholars. Cities were ranked by their schools. Rulers earned legitimacy through patronage of learning. Musa decided Mali would not simply export gold. It would export ideas. He began recruiting scholars, jurists, architects, poets, and teachers from Cairo, Andalusia, Mecca, and Medina. Some came willingly, drawn by opportunity. Others were persuaded by wealth and prestige. Among them was Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, an Andalusian architect and poet who would leave a permanent mark on West African architecture. Under Musa's direction, construction began across Mali's major cities. Mosques were expanded. New schools were founded. Libraries were built. Urban planning improved. The most famous project was the Great Mosque of Jen, rebuilt and expanded with royal patronage. Made from sun-dried mud brick, it blended local materials with Islamic design principles. It was practical, monumental, and symbolic. In Timbuktu, Musa commissioned the Jingareba Mosque, designed by al-Sahili. It became one of the most important centers of Islamic learning in Africa. These were not decorative gestures. They were statements. Mali was no longer just rich. Mali was learned. Mansa Musa placed education at the heart of governance. Islamic law, or Sharia, was strengthened in urban centers. Judges were trained. Legal consistency improved. Contracts became standardized. Trade benefited. Schools multiplied. Timbuktu became home to thousands of students drawn from across Africa and beyond. Subjects included theology, law, grammar, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and history. Books became valuable commodities. Manuscripts were imported at great expense. Scholars copied texts by hand. Libraries grew in private homes as well as institutions. At its height, Timbuktu housed tens of thousands of manuscripts, many of which still exist today. This was a golden age of African scholarship. Mali's economy under Musa was not dependent on gold alone. Agriculture thrived along the Niger River. Rice, millet, sorghum, and livestock sustained the population. Fishing communities flourished. Trade networks extended thousands of miles. Camel caravans crossed deserts. Riverboats connected cities. Markets operated under royal protection. Taxes were collected efficiently. Governors reported to the central authority. Corruption was controlled through oversight and severe penalties. Musa did not rule through fear. He ruled through structure. Although Musa is remembered for wealth and learning, Mali remained a military power. The empire maintained a professional army capable of defending borders and suppressing rebellion. Cavalry units, supported by infantry, ensured control over trade routes. Yet Musa did not pursue constant expansion. Unlike many rulers of his time, he understood the cost of endless war. Stability mattered more than conquest. Where expansion occurred, it was calculated. Cities like Gao came under firmer control, strengthening Mali's eastern reach. But Musa focused on consolidation, not chaos. Mansa Musa's devotion to Islam shaped his rule, but he did not erase traditional practices overnight. Mali remained religiously diverse. Indigenous beliefs continued, especially in rural areas. Musa tolerated this balance, understanding the risks of forced change. His authority came not from coercion, but from success. People accepted his leadership because the empire prospered. Islam provided legitimacy abroad. Tradition preserved unity at home. This balance kept Mali stable. While Mali flourished, Europe was watching. News of Musa's pilgrimage spread north through trade routes. European merchants heard stories of unimaginable gold. Scholars whispered of an African empire richer than any Christian kingdom. By the mid-14th century, Musa appeared on European maps. On the famous Catalan Atlas of 1375, he is depicted seated on a throne, crowned, holding a massive gold nugget. The caption identifies him as the ruler of Mali. This was unprecedented. Africa was no longer a blank space. It had a face. And that face was black, crowned, and wealthy beyond comprehension. Yet even at the height of his power, cracks quietly formed. The empire was vast. Administration depended heavily on Musa's personal authority. Wealth flowed, but it also created envy. Future rulers would not all match his discipline or vision. For now, Mali stood unmatched. But history is never still, and neither is power. At the height of his reign, Mansa Musa stood at a place few rulers ever reach. His empire was stable. His treasury overflowed. His name carried weight from West Africa to the Middle East and into Europe. Mali was respected, feared, and admired. Yet history is unkind to perfection. The same forces that raised Musa so high also placed enormous strain on his rule. Wealth, scale, and fame brought challenges that gold alone could not solve. This is the part of the story where greatness is tested. Mali under Mansa Musa was immense. Its territory spanned thousands of kilometers, crossing deserts, savannas, forests, and rivers. Communication was slow. Control depended on loyalty, trust, and constant oversight. Musa governed through governors and provincial rulers, many of whom were relatives or trusted nobles. This system worked because Musa was strong, respected, and present. But such systems are fragile. The farther power extends, the more it relies on the character of the man at the center. Musa understood this risk. He worked relentlessly to maintain order. He rotated officials. He punished corruption harshly. He rewarded loyalty generously. Still, the scale of Mali made cracks inevitable. Gold built Mali's reputation, but it also distorted priorities. As Mali's wealth became widely known, foreign interest increased. Traders arrived in greater numbers. Diplomats sought favor. Rivals watched closely. Gold attracted admiration, but also temptation. Internally, wealth could breed complacency. Officials accustomed to abundance sometimes abused their positions. Provincial rulers, far from the capital, tested boundaries. Musa countered this with strict governance. But no ruler can watch every corner of an empire. Gold made Mali powerful. It also made it visible. One of the greatest challenges of Musa's later years was succession. The Mali Empire did not follow a simple father-to-son inheritance system. Succession often passed among members of the royal family, sometimes between brothers, cousins, or sons of previous rulers. This system reduced the risk of child rulers, but increased internal rivalry. Musa prepared his successors carefully, but preparation does not guarantee obedience. Power attracts ambition. As Musa aged, the question loomed quietly: who could follow him? Musa's leadership style relied heavily on his personal presence. He was decisive, disciplined, and respected. His words carried weight. But personal authority does not outlive the person. Musa did not create a fully independent bureaucratic system capable of functioning without a strong ruler at the center. Institutions existed, but they were bound tightly to the throne. This was common in medieval empires. It was also dangerous. Externally, Mali faced pressure from neighboring powers and nomadic groups. Tuareg tribes in the Sahara controlled key desert routes and could disrupt trade if alienated. While Musa maintained diplomatic relationships, these alliances required constant attention. To the east, other African states watched Mali's dominance carefully. Control over cities like Gao was not absolute. Loyalty fluctuated. Musa relied on diplomacy more than brute force, but diplomacy is delicate. Musa's promotion of Islamic law strengthened urban governance, but it also created tension in rural areas where traditional beliefs remained strong. While Musa was tolerant, some officials were less flexible. In certain regions, disputes arose between Islamic judges and traditional authorities. Musa managed these tensions carefully, but they revealed a deeper issue. Mali was diverse. Holding such diversity together required wisdom, not just power. Despite his wealth and authority, Mansa Musa lived relatively modestly by royal standards. He was deeply religious. He prayed regularly. He fasted. He consulted scholars. He listened. Historical accounts describe him as thoughtful rather than cruel, generous rather than vain. He understood that wealth did not make him divine. This humility earned loyalty. But humility does not stop time. The exact details of Musa's final years are unclear. Like much of African medieval history, records are limited and often written by outsiders. What is known is that Musa continued to rule until around 1337 CE. He did not die in battle. He did not fall to rebellion. His reign ended quietly, almost gently, compared to the noise of his fame. This, too, is telling. Great empires often end in chaos. Musa's did not. Mansa Musa was succeeded by Mansa Magan, also known as Muhammad ibn Musa. Unlike his predecessor, Magan lacked discipline. Sources describe him as indulgent and less capable. Under his rule, Mali remained powerful, but cracks widened. Provincial loyalty weakened. The administration suffered. The empire did not collapse immediately, but it began to drift. The contrast between Musa and his successors would become painfully clear over time. Mali's decline was not sudden. It took decades. Trade routes shifted. New powers emerged. Internal disputes grew. External pressures increased. But none of this erases Musa's achievement. Empires rise and fall. Legacies endure. Mansa Musa did more than accumulate wealth. He placed Africa firmly into global history. He challenged stereotypes centuries before they were written. He proved that Black African civilizations could rival and surpass any of their time. He built cities of learning. He connected continents. He changed how the world saw Africa. And that impact did not disappear when gold faded. When Mansa Musa died, the world did not stop speaking his name. In Cairo, merchants still remembered the years when gold lost its meaning. In Mecca, scholars recalled the Black King who arrived with humility and left with respect. In Europe, mapmakers still drew him crowned and seated, holding gold like a symbol of an unknown world. But in Mali itself, something more fragile was unfolding. The age of Musa had ended, and the empire now had to survive without him. Mansa Musa's successor, Mansa Magan, inherited the largest and richest empire in West Africa. He inherited gold, cities, trade routes, and prestige. What he did not inherit was discipline. Historical accounts describe Magan as indulgent, inattentive to governance, and easily distracted by luxury. Where Musa invested wealth into institutions, Magan spent it on himself. This difference mattered. An empire can survive many things. It cannot survive neglect. Mali's strength rested on three pillars: control of trade routes, loyalty of provincial rulers, a respected central authority. When one weakens, the others follow. Under Magan, governors became less supervised. Tax collection faltered. Corruption increased. Military readiness declined. The empire still looked strong on the surface, but its foundation was eroding. Trade routes are lifelines. Mali's wealth depended on controlling the flow of gold, salt, and goods across the Sahara. This required constant security and diplomacy. As central authority weakened, rival groups began testing Mali's control. Tuareg tribes reasserted dominance over desert routes. Some cities resisted taxation. Merchants rerouted caravans to avoid instability. Each shift reduced Mali's revenue. Gold still existed, but it moved less predictably. As Mali weakened, neighboring states grew bolder. To the east, Songhai, centered around Gao, began asserting independence. Once under Mali's influence, Songhai gradually broke free and expanded. This was not an immediate rebellion. It was strategic patience. Songhai watched Mali's internal struggles and waited. When the time came, it moved decisively. Timbuktu remained a center of learning long after Musa's death. Scholars continued teaching. Manuscripts multiplied. Libraries expanded. Knowledge flowed. But without strong central protection, the city became vulnerable. Powerful cities attract attention. As Mali weakened, Timbuktu became a prize. While Mali struggled internally, Europe's interest in Africa intensified. Musa's pilgrimage had sparked curiosity and greed. Stories of gold-rich lands spread through Mediterranean ports. Merchants and adventurers dreamed of direct access. European maps grew more detailed. Africa was no longer empty. It was desirable. This shift in perception would shape centuries to come. Mali did not fall overnight. It shrank. Territories broke away. Authority fractured. Trade diminished. Wealth thinned. By the late 14th century, Mali was a shadow of its former self. By the 15th century, Songhai had replaced it as the dominant power in West Africa. This was the natural rhythm of empires. Rise, peak, decline. Although Mali declined politically, its cultural and intellectual legacy endured. Manuscripts survived in Timbuktu and surrounding cities. Islamic scholarship continued. Trade networks adapted rather than vanished. The idea of African greatness did not disappear. It waited. As Europe entered the age of exploration, Africa's story began to be rewritten. Colonial narratives minimized or ignored African empires. Mali was reduced to myth. Mansa Musa became a curiosity rather than a subject of serious study. Gold was emphasized. Governance was forgotten. Scholarship was dismissed. This distortion shaped global understanding for centuries. In recent decades, historians have begun correcting the record. Archaeology, manuscript preservation, and African scholarship have revived Mali's story. Mansa Musa is no longer a footnote. He is recognized as a ruler who reshaped economies, education, and global perception. His wealth is still debated. His impact is not. Mansa Musa's true achievement was not gold. It was proof. Proof that Africa was never absent from history. Proof that black civilizations were sophisticated, organized, and influential. Proof that global history is incomplete without Africa at its center. Musa forced the world to look. Even when it looked away later, it could never fully forget. Centuries after his death, Mansa Musa still unsettles history. Not because of mystery alone, and not simply because of gold, but because his existence disrupts comfortable narratives. He does not fit neatly into the versions of the past many were taught to accept. He was African. He was black. He ruled an empire of order, learning, and wealth on a scale the world had never seen. And that reality forces questions. Was Mansa Musa truly the wealthiest human in history? Modern economists often struggle with this question because Musa's wealth cannot be measured using contemporary systems. There were no stock markets, no GDP calculations, no central banks. Yet comparison is still possible. Mali controlled a dominant share of the world's gold supply during Musa's reign. Gold was the foundation of global currency. Whoever controlled gold controlled trade. Musa did not merely possess gold. He regulated its movement, controlled its release, and determined its value across regions. When he spent it, economies shifted. When he withheld it, markets tightened. No modern billionaire has ever exercised that kind of influence over global wealth. In this sense, Mansa Musa was not simply rich. He was structurally powerful. Part of what makes Musa difficult to grasp is scale. His wealth was not stored in vaults. It moved with people, animals, and cities. It fed scholars, paid builders, supported pilgrims, and stabilized regions. It existed as action, not accumulation. This challenges modern ideas of wealth as something hoarded rather than deployed. Musa understood wealth as responsibility. That mindset alone separates him from most figures he is compared to today. Over time, Mansa Musa became a symbol rather than a person. European writers exaggerated. Some romanticized him. Others reduced him to caricature. The exotic African king drowning the world in gold. In this process, the man disappeared. What often gets lost is that Musa was disciplined, cautious, and thoughtful. His generosity was grounded in faith. His governance was methodical. His investments were deliberate. He made mistakes, especially during the pilgrimage. But he learned from them. This capacity to adapt is rarely acknowledged, yet it defines great leadership. One uncomfortable truth remains. If Mansa Musa had ruled in Europe, his story would dominate textbooks. His name would be as familiar as Caesar or Charlemagne. Instead, his legacy was sidelined. This was not accidental. Colonial narratives required Africa to appear empty, primitive, and dependent. Empires like Mali contradicted that image, so they were minimized or erased. The silence around Musa tells us as much about modern history as medieval Africa. Mansa Musa's story is not only about the past. It speaks to the present. It reminds us that Africa has long been a contributor to global civilization, not a late arrival. It challenges stereotypes that still shape politics, media, and education. It also reframes discussions of wealth and power. Musa shows that wealth without vision is fragile, but wealth invested in people, knowledge, and structure can echo across centuries. In Timbuktu, manuscripts survive despite war, neglect, and climate. They cover law, astronomy, medicine, poetry, and theology. They are written proof of a literate, scholarly society that thrived under Musa's influence. These texts are not relics. They are witnesses. They testify that African history was written by Africans, long before outsiders claimed the pen. When cartographers drew Mansa Musa on medieval maps, they captured more than a ruler. They captured a moment when the world had to admit Africa's importance. A black king crowned, holding gold, seated with confidence. Not begging for recognition. Not borrowing legitimacy. Simply existing in power. That image still unsettles. Empires fall. Borders change. Wealth fades. But significance endures. Mansa Musa proved that Africa could shape the world on its own terms. He proved that leadership rooted in knowledge and faith could rival any empire of steel and blood. And he proved that history, no matter how distorted, cannot completely erase truth. Mansa Musa was not important because he was rich. He was important because he forced the world to pay attention to Africa, to black power, to a civilization that had always been there. Gold opened the door, but what stood behind it was something far greater.